This short story I'm going to read to you now comes from Anthony Horowitz's Four Secret Undercover Files. It was the Free World Book Day book, and it follows on from the very tense and dramatic story about the wrong man's shoes. This story is called Double Agent, and I'm sure it's going to feature Alex Rider being fabulously heroic whilst getting his studies in as well and his homework. The airport belonged to another age, a time when air travel was an adventure, when planes still had propellers and had to stop at strange sounding places to refuel on their way across the world. There was just one runway, a narrow strip of silver grey concrete cutting through grass that had been perfectly mown. The single terminal was a white building with a curving entrance and a terrace where people could watch the planes take off. It could have been the clubhouse or an expensive golf course. The airport had no name. Although it was only an hour outside London, there were no road signs pointing to it. Indeed, it seemed to have done its best to lose itself in a maze of country lanes that looped and twisted through thick woodland. The local residence in the nearest house was more than a mile away, believed that it was a private flying club used by millionaires with their own planes, and for a brief time it had been. The airport had been bought by the Secret Service back in the 70s, and now it was used for flights that nobody talked about. People who weren't meant to be in the country arrived here on planes that didn't exist. There was no passport control because few of the travellers carried passports, and if they did, they probably were fake. A white control tower stood at the far end of the runway, and it managed not just the incoming and outgoing flights, but all the surrounding airspace. When planes were ready to take off here, Heathrow and Gatwick just had to wait. At 9:30 on a cold morning at the end of April, a blue Rover Vitesse was making its way towards the secret airport. The sound of the V-Air engine was almost inaudible as it cruised through a virtual tunnel of leaves. The start of the mouth had been warm and sunny, but there had been a cold snap the night before, and the result was a layer of fog floating over the ground, deadening everything and turning the world a ghostly white. A man and woman were sitting in the back. The driver had no idea who they were. His name was Enderby, and he was a lower level MI6 operative trained for certain duties, the first of which was never to ask questions. He'd picked them up at a London hotel at exactly 6 o'clock, loaded a single suitcase into the boot, and brought them here. And yet, glancing in the rearview mirror, Enderby couldn't stop himself wondering about the passengers. He guessed they were husband and wife. There was something about their body language that said as much, even though neither of them had uttered a single word. The man was in his 30s, well built with close-cropped fair hair and dark, tired eyes. He was wearing a suit with an open-neck shirt. What would you think, seeing him in the street? Something in the city, perhaps? Security, ex-army. This was a man who knew how to look after himself. He'd got a relaxed confidence as someone who's very dangerous. The woman sitting next to him was unhappy. Enderby had noticed from the moment she'd stopped reluctantly in the car. He could see it now in her eyes. They were nice eyes, blue eyes. A couple of years younger than the man, maybe an actress or a dancer. She was wearing a jacket, grey trousers, and yes, there it was, the wedding ring on her finger. Enderby was right. The two people in the back of his car were called John and Helen Ryder. They'd been married for 4 years. They were here because they were leaving the country, maybe permanently. They'd been apart for a long time, but that was all over now. Their new life together was about to begin. They'd almost arrived. Enderby had driven this route many times and recognised the elm tree with the nesting box hanging from one of its branches. The airport was half a mile away. However, he was completely unaware of the advanced high-resolution camera with its 25mm varifocal lens concealed inside the nesting box. And he would have been surprised to learn that even now his face was being examined on a television screen inside the control tower. It was actually the third camera they'd seen. The car broke out of the wood and crossed a cattle grid set in the road. If the driver had been identified as an enemy agent, the cattle grid would have rotated and shredded the tyres. The airport lay ahead. A plane was waiting on the runway. It was an old twin-engine Avro Anson C-19 that might have been rolled out of a museum. Once used by the RAF for coastal patrol, the Anson hadn't seen regular service for 20 years. Certainly it suited the airport. They were both relics of the past. A slim, dark-haired man stepped out of the terminal building, supporting himself on a heavy stick. He'd been sent to supervise the departure, and Enderby recognised him with surprise. He'd visited the man a couple of times recently and worked with him in the past. His name was Anthony Howell, and his middle name was Sean. People called him Ash. The car slowed down and stopped. The man got out, went round the door, and the two of them moved forward to meet Ash. John, Helen. Ash smiled at them, but he'd recently been in a lot of pain, and it still showed. "How are you, Ash?" John Ryder asked. "I'm okay." Obviously wasn't true. Ash was feverish, sweating. His hands were gripping the walking stick so tight that his knuckles were tight. "You look terrible." Ash didn't disagree. "They sent me to say goodbye. Are you ready? I've got your case loaded on board." He limped past them over to the car. Enderby unlocked the boot and took out the suitcase. "He's not very talkative," Helen muttered. "He's hurt." John glanced at his wife. "Are you okay?" "I don't like leaving Alex." "I know that, nor do I, but we didn't have any choice. You heard what the doctor said." Alex Ryder was just 3 months old. Just a few days before, he developed an ear infection, which meant he couldn't fly. Helen had left him with a cheerful Irishwoman, Maud Kelly, a maternity nurse who'd been with them since birth. Helen's first instinct had been to stay with her infant son, but she also needed to be with her husband. The two of them had been apart for too long. "Maud will come out with him next week," John Ryder said. "His new home," Helen smiled, but a little sadly.